and this was played on August 27th, 1958. His opponent, none other than Tigran Vartanovich Petrosian, who was born in Tiflis, which is the nowadays known as Tbilisi. That's in Georgia, but he was born to Armenian parents. June 17th, 1929. He passed away August 13th, 1984, so he also died young, 55 years of age. They both, Mikhail Tal and Tigran Petrosian, died at 55. Petrosian eventually relocated to Armenia, where his parents were from, but then in 1949 he moved to Moscow. He was an avid student of Aaron Nimzovich. His play was renowned for its virtually impenetrable defense and patient maneuvering. This technique earned him the nickname Iron Tigran. His first major win was the championship of the Republic of Georgia in 1945. He was only 16 years of age at the time. Wow. He won the 5th Soviet Junior Championship in 1946 with 14 points out of 15. He won or came equal first in the Armenian Championships of 46, 48, 74, 76, and 1980. He won the Moscow Championship in 51, 56, and 68. He became an IM in 1951. That was at the Soviet Chess Championship. He won the Soviet Championship 3 times. That was in 59, 61, and 75. He shared the title with Lev Pologaevsky in 1969. He became a Grandmaster when he came equal second place in 1952 Interzonal tournament at Stockholm, and that qualified him for the Great Zurich Candidates Tournament in 1953. 8 times he became a candidate for the World Championship. Those were in 53, 56, 59, 62, 71, 74, 77, and 1980. He won the Curacao Candidates Tournament in 1962 without losing a single game. And then the following year, he won the World Championship against Mikhail Botvinnik. That was 1963, becoming the 9th official world champion. He retained his title in the following cycle in 1966, defeating challenger Boris Spassky. You probably know that Spassky turned around the next cycle in 1969 and became world champion. There are 2 opening systems named for Petrosian, and that's the Petrosian variation of the King's Indian Defense and the Petrosian system of the Queen's Indian Defense. Tigran Petrosian. We have an English opening with c4, an Anglo-Indian defense with knight f6. Knight c3 is the Queen's Knight variation, g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, kingside castles, knight f3, d6, kingside castles, knight c6, d3. Now Bobby with knight h5. That has a hit on the knight, but it also prevents this pawn from coming to d4. The book move is e5. The usual way to prevent d4 is to play e5. And that line continues with the rook to b1, a5 here, a3, h6. This transposes to the reversed Sicilian full symmetry line. b4, a takes b4, a takes b4, bishop e6, pawn b5, knight e7, bishop b2, queen d7, rook e1, bishop h3, bishop h1, and knight g4. That is your book line. Let's go back. Bobby with knight h5. d4, e5. Resist the urge. Some beginners will play something like the bishop to f5 here, because after all, you need to develop your pieces. But resist that in this position, because after h3, you're forced to come back to d7 anyway, because the fork is coming here. All right, so e5 here, d5, knight e7, pawn to e4, pawn to f5. The bot wants you to prevent the pawn from coming to b4 by playing your pawn to a4. Sensible. E takes the f-man here, and g takes f5. Don't take the pawn with the knight, because that's going to be answered again by a fork, even though that gets a question mark. So I'll play knight to d4. You'll take my knight. Oh, because I can play bishop g4 and get a super attack on this knight? Ah, okay, maybe you can get away with it. Maybe you can get away with it. What if I take your knight and let you have my queen? Oh! Yes, ladles and jelly spoons. Yes, and the point is, bam! That's the point right there. That's the point right there, ladles and jelly spoons. All right, you can play queen h4. I will attack your queen with my bishop, and then instead of h5, should I take this pawn? Take one of these two pawns. Let's take this one. Check mark. I should have gone with my first instinct, and then pick up that bishop. And your compensation, this rook is still hanging, so you could pick up and exchange yet. If you play rook f7, pawn takes the pawn, right? White still has quite a bit of play there, even though he doesn't have his queen. The eval bar favors white. All right, so that's a double exclam for Coach Daniel. Anyway, pawn takes the pawn. That's the move. Knight takes the E-man. Wow. And knight takes the G-man. Wow. Two desperados in a row. This is a discovered attack against the undefended knight, and that's a desperado. After you take my knight, he took it with the H-man, captured toward the center. Question mark. Normally we do want to capture toward the center. In this example, I guess the bot is saying this is better to open the file for the rook. Bishop takes the knight here. I gather that gets the big red X because he's going to push your bishop back to g7 here. So you can save a move by taking with the pawn. f4, bishop g7, bishop e3, bishop d7. Now bishop d4 is played, putting the question to this bishop. I was kind of expecting king to f2 with the idea of this coming over here. I get a thumbs up for that. But bishop to d4 was played, knight g6. Oof. The point of rook f7 is to simply defend the bishop with the rook, and then if he trades, you get your rook in line with this backward pawn and the king. Knight g6, though, is Bobby's move. Rook e1, big red X. The point of this move, of course, is to take control of the open file. Very reasonable move, most of us would think. But the bot is saying capture him before he captures you with check. So rook f7, no doubt, is inaccurate because bishop takes bishop check is a nice way to attract the queen away so that I can play pawn h5. Bam! Do that with tempo. You get a free move. Rook f7, however, was Bobby's choice. Bishop f3, and that liberates the queen from the aforementioned defensive duties of the h5 square. Queen f8, king f2 now. Perhaps he still will come over here. He's got control here, so it's hard to say. But rook e8 contests the control of the open file, so instead he went ahead and traded the rooks. Don't make the rookie mistake of bishop takes the pawn, because you will get your bishop trapped. And that bishop is a guaner. So rook takes the rook, queen takes the rook, bishop takes the bishop, rook takes the bishop. A goner, not an iguana. Queen d4, pawn b6, rook h1. I knew there'd be a rook coming to the h-file. Actually, b4 appealed to me here to take control of the c5 square, and it also covers a5 to keep his pawn from pushing there. Let me show you. Here the bot gives this a star, so I'm sure it's the best move. But my idea, I get a thumbs up. My idea is to control here, so eventually I can push here. But I also take a restrictive control of this square. And knight e2 can be played on a subsequent move over here. You may actually be able to play knight e2 now. Yeah, check mark. Anyway, rook h1, pawn a5. See what I'm saying? That now prevents b4 from being played. Knight d1 gets the question mark. I still prefer knight e2, as in the Previous example, I get a star. The bot calling for pawn a3. Queen f8 right here. And the idea of queen f8 is to control both of these squares. But technically, I don't know, the bot's calling for knight e7, but you can control f6 by sliding your rook this away. I get a check mark there. Queen f8 not cared for by Ficklebot. Knight e3. Welcome to the party. Now rook f7, pawn b3, queen g7. Queens are traded. Knight c2 being called for. Yeah, that defends the queen while keeping more tension on the board. So if rook e7, then rook h5 can be played right here. Right, it's hard to say what to play here, because really you want your knight to be able to come here. All right, anyway, knight c2 apparently better than trading queens. King takes the queen, pawn a3, rook f8, bishop e2, knight e7, bishop d3, super attacking this pawn. We've got it 3 times defended, so it is safe and sound at the moment. h6, rook h5, adds another attacker. Bishop e8 hits the rook, rook back to h2. So let's talk about this, because you might be tempted to take this with the knight giving check. It's not as strong as rook h2, I don't think. It gets a question mark. And the point is, after knight takes knight, the rook takes the knight. And you've got a passed pawn right there. Even though the eval bar says black is still better here. Huh, that's interesting. Why is black still better here? Because his bishop is restricted by his own pawns over here, maybe? I mean, he's got 6 pawns to 5. Why is black still better here? Oh, because you know what? I can rook h8, threatening to skewer the rook and the bishop. Yeah, if I rook h8, he has to move one of his 2 pieces. I don't have to make a trade or leave my rook there to trade. You want to bring the bishop up right away, because then he takes and your king is overworked. This would be a mistake, wouldn't it? Looks so good, right? But no, you can see you just lose a piece. So I would play here, threatening here, and now you have to move one of your 2 guys, or else. Anyway, rook h2. Rook h1 gets the nod from the bot because it gives that rook more choices. Bishop d7, rook h1 now. Rook h8, knight c2, king f6. King f6 is a sensible move. It adds a defender to this vulnerable, isolated f-man. It also supports the knight in the event of a rook e1 type of hit. So the bot gives it an inaccuracy, but I think the reason it's recommending h5 is that keeps this rook from coming back into the super attack, doesn't it? Yeah, in that earlier position, let's come back to, oh, no, not here. It was, where was that? Which position was it? Oh, it was here. It was here, right? Oh, you mean, oh, okay, I remember. In this position. It was this position that didn't actually happen. This was a hypothetical. Yeah, because of this and this and this. Yeah, maybe I don't move the rook. Maybe I keep the rook there and just move my bishop and make black play bishop here. Oh, wait a minute. I'm trapped. Oh, you're right. It doesn't work. I'm trapped. Yeah. You're right. You get this. Yeah, you get this. And now I'm up at the exchange for the pawn. Yep. You are right. All right. So, rook h2. Okay, coming back to this, I didn't think this was so bad. It adds a defender here. It defends the knight so that this is not really viable. But the point of h5 is to prevent the rook from coming back and renewing the attack. And it also clamps down the g4 square, doesn't it? King f6, however, was Bobby's move. Knight d4, king back to g7. So this is kind of funny. You have these grandmaster dances that happen. A lot of times they're making these little adjustments, trying to get to the time control. Here in this position, the bot is calling for h5. And h5 has the merits of playing knight g8, knight h6, and knight to g4. But this move is not without merit because it gives the knight the same option, only in a different path. Knight g8, knight f6, knight h4. Okay, so king g7. Bishop e2 here, knight g8, and pawn b4. And interrogating the A-man. Bishop d3 being recommended for the super attack on that pawn. You only have one defender. All right, so b4 here. Knight f6. Bishop d3 now, super attacking that pawn. A takes b4, a takes b4. Now king g6, super defending the pawn. Rook a8 with the intention of rook a2 is recommended by the bot. The bot wants to play this. And the point is, after takes and takes and takes, you have rook a2 check. Boom, like that. A pretty equal game. Anyway, king g6 is played. Rook a1 prevents. Rook a8. Knight g4 check. Now king e2 was played. Rook e8 check. King to d2. Knight f6. Rook a6. Curious move. Rook b8. Bot likes rook g8 with a hit on the g-man here. But that would be answered by rook a7, forcing you to rook c8. So my question is, instead of rook b8, why not play rook c8, since you're going to end up going there anyway? And I get a star. I get a star for that. Just play it to begin with. Well, rook b8, rook a7, and rook c8 anyway. c5 gets a question mark. Okay, king e3 is being recommended so that he can come back here if necessary, right? I mean, both players playing both offense and defense at the same time, obviously. I mean, you could just as easily play a passive move like bishop c2 here or not. Inaccurate, but, you know, I mean, look at the eval bar. It might be slightly inaccurate, but white is still perfectly fine. Maybe, well, I mean, remember this. If the eval bar is between 1 and -1, for humans, that's equal. All right, well, c5, b takes c5, b takes c5, d takes c5, knight f3. And black cannot allow knight to e5. He needs to do something about that. I mean, he can allow it, but he needs to beware of knight e5. Yeah, so he plays king f7 so that he can come to e7 if knight e5 is played. So be careful about trying to be sneaky here. It's when you try to get cute that things get ugly. So don't play a move like knight e4 with check. Notice that gets a double question mark, because after the bishop takes the knight and pawn takes the bishop, then you have the aforementioned knight e5 check, and you can kiss the bishop goodbye. Same thing. Why not take the pawn on d5? Same exact reason. You lose your bishop if you do that. Okay, so king f7 is played so that knight e5 can be answered by king e7. Now knight takes the bishop, and actually you don't want to take that with the king. You have to take it with the knight. If you take with the king, boom. That's a skewer. So Bobby finds the correct move. Bishop takes the pawn on f5, and we reach a rook knight versus rook bishop endgame. Rook f8, pawn g4 defends, king d6, bishop takes the knight, king takes the bishop, and we've got king rook versus king rook. White's pawn's slightly healthier than black's, but it should be a draw. King e3 defending the imperiled pawn. Rook e8 check, king f3. And he probably would like to get a hit here on our h-man. King d6, rook a6 check is played. King takes the pawn. Oh, yeah. Oh, wait, no, why? Why interpose? Why interpose here? Because, I mean, can't I just take anyway and then pick up this pawn anyway? Oh, take it with your pawn? Okay, I'm not good enough to understand that. Anyway, takes, and c4. Boom, boom, boom. That's pretty harsh to give that a question mark. Passed pawns are meant to be pushed, but the bot prefers to play to d1 because white has these two passed pawns of his own, and you want to be able to get your rook behind the passed pawns. Rook h1, we got to worry about the rook coming to d1 with check. c3, g5, c5, rook d1 check, king to c4, g6, c2, rook c1, king d3, pawn f5, g7 would win here. So don't play. Wow, this is pretty slick. You can't play king d2. Bobby plays rook g8. That's the right move. If you play king d2, guys, you know what white plays. Boom! Double exclam for Coach Daniel. And the point is, after I takes, boom, and white has the advantage. You have to blockade, but f6 is coming, and this one rook can't stop these two pawns. Let's go back. All right, so rook g8 here. King f4. King d2 now. Rook takes the pawn check. King takes the rook. King g5. Pawn c4. Pawn f6. Pawn c3. Pawn f7. And Petrosian offered the draw. Now, you may wonder, why offer a draw? Does it make sense to draw here? Well, you've got to blockade the pawn, right? And then g7 comes. Right, so why draw? Isn't he going to promote? Well, the thing is now after rook takes the pawn and promotes, I'm playing my rook. Let's slide it over here to b7. And the queen could come to a2 with check. But I need to make my way toward that pawn while I have the chance. So king f4, yes. Rook b3, king e3, and now if you play king b2, now the key is queen h8, and that pins the pawn to the king. And you don't want to play king c1 because that blocks the promotion square, so king b1, and now I just play the repetition, and that's how you draw that game. So yeah, Petrosian really took advantage of the opportunities he had in the opening in this game. A well-fought game. The middle game, I think Bobby got the better of the middle game, but a very nice end game for both. Petrosian's accuracy was 93 in this game. Bobby's was 92.5, and their individual game rating assessments were 2,800 for Petrosian, 2,700 for Fischer. Wait a minute, what's the question? After pawn push, you ignore the attack, move the king, and push your own pawn. Where at? Instead of rook b1? You mean instead of rook b3? You mean instead of king b1? I'm not sure at what juncture. Instead of rook b7. Oh, instead of this, you want to do what? No, you'll lose if you give up that rook. You can't give up the rook, I don't think. Well, maybe you can. Let me think, because then I'm playing the c2. Yeah, you might. Your line might work. Play. You're saying play rook, king b2. Give up the rook because now I've got c2. No, you're right. That worked. It works. You even get an exclam for that. So give yourself a thumbs up. Give yourself a thumbs up. Yeah, because he has no way of stopping the pawn other than keeping you in check. So something like this, and then they just come over, and every time you threaten to promote, he's got to do something to stop it. You defend, and then, whether he comes here or here. Well, the funny thing here, by the way, is you just play this and say, please take my pawn, because that's a stalemate.